When my son pointed at me across the living room and shouted, "Pay the rent or get out," the room went silent like a dropped plate. It wasn't the words alone. It was the way they landed. It was Christmas. It was my house. If you like these stories, please subscribe to Soul Bite YouTube channel. It helps us share more. I have lived in that house for 32 years. It has the same linoleum in the kitchen that my husband first laid down when we moved in. It has a paint stain on the banister from a time when my granddaughter tried to help, and I didn't have the heart to scold her. There was a pot of cinnamon tea on the stove, and the air smelled faintly of orange peel and baking sugar. I'd spent that morning rearranging the little ceramic angels on the mantel, making sure Grandma Ruth's photograph looked right beside the holly. The house has been my steady place. It has held birthdays, funerals, broken hearts, and quiet triumphs. My son never thought of it that way. I will tell you everything. I will tell you how small slights grew like moss. I will tell you about the dollars that slipped away and the quiet savings I kept tucked in a tin for a rainy day. I will tell you plainly how one sentence can change the way a family stands in a room together. I will tell you because we have a generation of women who know what it means to be patient for too long. We will walk through this slowly. I want you to feel the kitchen light, the weight of a teacup, the exact moment it all changed. My name is Miriam, I'm 68. I have more laugh lines than I expected, and fewer regrets than I thought I would. I raised 3 children mostly on the wages of a school cafeteria worker, and the odd babysitting shifts I could pick up when the grandbabies were small. My husband, Robert, died 11 years ago. He was gentle in the way he loved the world and messy with the bills. After he passed, I kept the house the same because it felt like we were still here together. I kept the garden because his roses still burst like small, stubborn fireworks every May. Michael, my son who shouted, has always had a temper that could flare like a match. He also has a good heart when he remembers to reach for it. He is 40, not a boy. He has lived with me off and on since his divorce. His pride was bruised and he resented the world in the way some people resent their own reflection. He has a job now, steady enough, but his paycheck never seemed to stretch. He had an apartment at one point. He moved back in when things got tight. I thought that was what family did. I thought shelter was as simple as putting a plate on the table for someone who needs it. I thought love could wash over the practicalities of living together. There were small cuts before the big one. He would leave dishes in the sink and say, "I'll get to it." He would borrow my car and forget to fill the tank. He would take my sugar and never replace the bag. I would laugh it off in the beginning. What else was there to do? I had always laughed. Laughing keeps a house from getting too quiet. But then the little things grew stubborn. He started arguing with me about the thermostat. He argued about whose job it was to shovel snow. He argued about our holiday plans, and the tone grew sharp and sudden, like a snap in winter air. One afternoon in November, he cornered me in the hallway and asked, pointed and resentful, "Why do you always act like you own everything?" I said softly, "Because I do." He said, "That's not fair." I said, "Fair isn't always the same as what we have." That should have been the end of it. It was not. As Thanksgiving slid into December, the house filled with the usual preparations. I baked more than I needed to. I wrapped presents in tissue paper because I liked the sound it makes. The grandchildren came and went. My daughter, Laura, called from 2 states away and asked if she could come for Christmas Eve. I said yes before I thought about it. I always said yes. That kindness had been part of me for decades. It had worn neat little grooves in my heart. Michael was bored that week. He complained about the tinsel and how it was too much work to move his things. He complained about money in a way that felt like a lecture and in a way that felt like a verdict. He started talking aloud about rent. He said we should have a household chart and he should contribute. I nodded in the living room and told him I appreciated the idea. I did not say no. I did not say yes. I stayed quiet and let the room breathe. On the day the fight happened, I had been humming. The radio played an old Nat King Cole song while I put the last 5 cinnamon rolls in a tin. The grandchildren were at a family friend's house for the afternoon. Laura's plane was due in the evening. I had the roast in the oven and the tree lit because sometimes you have to make a place feel like Christmas whether or not everyone is ready to agree. There was a calm in the air that a woman my age learns to make no matter what. Michael came in that afternoon and slammed his bag down by the door. He had that look in his eyes that I'd come to recognize. It's the look of someone who has rehearsed a speech in his head and is ready to deliver it. I was folding napkins when he said, loud enough for the house to lean toward him, "I can't keep paying for everything here." I looked up. My hands were floury. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You don't pay anything. You're an adult. You should pay rent." It landed like a cold cup of tea on a winter morning. I remember the way the light hit his face. There was a tired anger there, but also a sense of victory like a small man who thinks he's found a loophole. I remember thinking of how many winters I'd sat up with him when he had fever as a child. I remembered scraping winter paint from his bikes. In the parking lot of the hospital where his dad died, I had sat with him and let him hold my hand. Those memories came before my mouth formed any answer. He shouted it then, louder and more cruel than I expected. "Pay the rent or get out." The syllables were like iron. They seemed to echo off the dishes, off the ornaments. My friend would say that a loud voice hides a trembling heart. I did not think of that in the moment. I thought of all the tiny ways I had stood in the background and smoothed life out. I thought of the nights I had sat awake and added up the bills in my head until the numbers made their own kind of hush. I also thought about the house itself and how it had kept us all safe. People expect a fire when a fight like that happens. They expect a woman my age to crumble, to beg, to make a plan in sudden fear. They often expect dramatic exits or dramatic apologies. That is not what I did. I had a different kind of answer that came from a long practice of patience and from a place of dignity. I set the napkins down. I looked at him and I spoke in a voice the way grandmothers do when they have already given every possible forgiveness and can no longer be taken for granted. I said calmly, "If you want rent, we can have that conversation. But I will not be spoken to like that in my home." It wasn't a shout. It was a decision that had been sitting in my chest like a seed. He blinked. He was expecting a fight and he got a boundary. Anger can be stopped by something softer sometimes. He froze, which made me sway on my feet like a reed. He came back at me with, "You don't understand. I pay your phone bill, groceries, everything. You should be part of this." I said, "You have been given shelter by the family, as we have given shelter to you when you needed it. But shelter is not a bargaining chip to be used against your mother." He laughed once, a short sound that was not very funny, and said, "This is about fairness." I said, "Fairness is not measured by money alone." Then I said something I had not simplified for him before. "I raised you, I fed you, I wiped your tears, I kept this house. I did not do it for thanks. I did it because that is what mothers do, but I have a right to be spoken to with decency." There it was, the turning point. The room shifted. People who were in the kitchen sat down for a moment. Laura walked in then, suitcase and scarf, bright with holiday energy, and the air sparked with new nervousness. She saw him standing there. She saw the way his jaw had clenched. She looked between us and asked quietly, "What's going on?" I told her plainly, because I could not ask her to carry a secret in the doorway of my home. I said, "Michael told me to pay rent or get out." Laura put down her bag slowly and her face went soft. She had always been the kind to act without fury. She came to my side without words. That night, after the guests left and the tree lights blinked like gentle eyes, Michael retreated to his room. He slammed the door with the kind of sound that carries annoyance into sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and a notebook where I write down the small things of life. I wrote a list of expenses out of habit. It's something I've always done. I keep track of what comes in and what goes out like a conversation between myself and my future. I had a pension, not large but steady. I kept a modest savings. I had made choices over the years to tighten my belt so that we could stay standing. The list brought clarity. A week later, things got noisier. He brought up the rent again, but now with a spreadsheet printed out. He had done the math with the warmth of certainty. He said, "I'm under a lot of pressure." He said, "My children are counting on me." He said, "You need to help me." Those lines would have moved me 5 years before. But now there was a new element. He seemed to believe that my kindness had no boundaries. He seemed to think of kindness as a limitless resource. My patience was the sort of thing you can only squeeze for so long. At the heart of it, the fight was about respect. He wanted me to contribute in a way that would feel equal. I wanted him to understand that equality means conversation, not ultimatums. I wanted him to see that a house is more than brick and beam. It is a ledger written with bedtime stories, with the sound of the vacuum on a rainy morning, with the way someone leaves a mug where they will find it. I wanted him to see that our relationship had an accounting that wasn't on his spreadsheet. I told him one afternoon, quietly, if you want to contribute money, we will talk about it. We will write it down. We will make it fair. He perked up like someone who had found the map to treasure. He immediately put together a plan in his head. He saw a percentage. He saw a day for rent. I could feel him ready to slide the idea into place as though that would fix the weather in his heart. I said, it will only work if you stop talking to me the way you did. We will not live by commands. He looked at me and said, short and sharp, you don't get to tell me how to ask for things. I surprised even myself then. I took a deep breath and I made a decision quietly for the future. I packed a small envelope. Inside, there was a photocopy of the house deed, a clean, typed note, and $200 in cash. The note was not angry. It was not dramatic. It said simply, this house has been our haven. It remains mine as long as I choose to keep it. I will not be bullied into paying for a roof over my head. I love you. You are my son. You do not get to give me ultimatums in my home. I left the envelope on the hall table where he would find it. When he opened the envelope, he was flustered. He read the note and looked at me as though I were suddenly a stranger and an answer at the same time. He said, you think this is some kind of lesson? I said calmly, I think this is a boundary. He shouted then, a single, fierce word I had not heard him use as an adult. He said, you're impossible. The accusation landed like a pebble in a pond, and for once, the ripples were not mine to soothe. We had the small reveal I promised you I would give in the middle. It was not about money alone. It was about a discovery he made when he went through old boxes one rainy afternoon. He was looking for a screwdriver and found a stack of old holiday letters. He found a card from my husband when he had been young and hopeful. He found a photograph of his father teaching him to ride a bike. He found, tucked behind those pictures, a typed letter that his father had written the year before he died. In that letter, Robert wrote about how proud he was of the family home and how he wanted the house to remain a place of refuge. He wrote that if anyone ever used the house as leverage, it would break more than walls. Michael read the letter out loud, and the words filled the quiet in a way that made him swallow. That was the small payoff. He got a piece of truth that softened him, if only for a moment. He looked at the photograph and said, ashamed, I forgot sometimes what we were given. That line, so simple, showed the crack in his armor. It did not fix everything. It did not suddenly make him graceful, but it made a space where we could talk instead of throw stones. After that, the conversations were awkward and real. We sat in the kitchen with the papers spread out. I explained my finances plainly. I told him what I could do and what I could not. I offered to take part of the grocery bill if he wanted to contribute half the heating bill. He wanted a number. He wanted certainty. I gave him figures. He counted them like beads. He then looked at me and asked quietly, do you want me to leave? The question was a compass that pointed at the real issue in our home. Did he want to make a life that included me, or did he want to shape me into something else? I surprised myself by saying, no, I do not want you to leave. But I do want you to respect this house and the woman who lives here. He nodded, and the nod was small and genuine. He said softer, I'm sorry for how I spoke. The apology was not perfect, but it was honest. Looking back, the thing that changed everything was not the money or the documents. It was the boundary I finally put in place and the courage to name what I would accept. The rest followed like a slow, steady thaw. Winter passed into spring. Michael kept his job. He settled into a rhythm where he paid his share and did his share. He began to take on small tasks without being asked. He fixed a loose step on the back porch. He started bringing out the recycling on Tuesdays. He watered the plants when I was away. It was not a sudden transformation like in the movies. It was a series of small corrections, like straightening a picture frame a little at a time. Our relationship did not gloss over the hurt. We talked about it. We sat on the porch and spoke in plain sentences that did not try to hide anything. There were hard nights. There were evenings when old resentments would bubble up like scum on soup. But there were also mornings when he would come to the kitchen with the newspaper and a cup of my special coffee and hand it to me with a gentle smile. That small action was the reconciliation of two people who understood that love sometimes needs boundaries to thrive. He began to see me as an individual rather than as someone whose job it was to carry him. A year after that bitter December, a small miracle arrived in the form of a job offer across town. It meant better hours and a little extra in his paycheck. He took a deep breath and told me he was thinking of getting his own place. I could have felt a sudden emptiness then, the kind you feel when a child first leaves home. But instead, I felt a warm pride. I had not wanted to be the trapdoor into which he fell. I had wanted to be the bridge that helped him cross to his own shore. I said simply, "If you think you're ready, I will help where I can." He hugged me then, a fierce hold that made both of us cry. The day he moved out, the house felt too large and then, in a way I did not expect, exactly right. He left a note on the fridge that said, "Thank you for keeping me, I'll always be back." He came over often. His children came for Sunday dinners. Laura moved closer and helped with the garden. In time, my grandson called me Nana, the way he used to when he was small, and it felt like a cord tying me to the future again. What changed everything in that room that Christmas was not some grand lawsuit or a dramatic eviction. It was the steady, plain decision to refuse to be bullied in my own home. It was the refusal to let anger substitute for conversation. It was a boundary that said, "I am not disposable." It was a choice to treat myself with the respect I would have given my own mother. That seemed small in the moment, and it was enormous. If you are listening and you have a child who has pushed you besides the point of patience, know this: kindness and firmness can live together. You can be soft and still hold a line. You can be patient and still refuse abuse. It is not your job to be everything for everyone. It is your right to be treated with decency. People often write to me asking for precise words to say when faced with cruelty. They ask for a script to follow. I don't have a magic script. What I have is a way that comes from years of living. Tell the truth plainly, state your needs calmly, and hold a boundary without malice. You do not need to punish to be heard. Sometimes you simply need to stop being the person others rely on to take every blow. It is not selfish. It is self-preservation. There were practical things I learned through that season. Keep your records, know where your important papers are, have a small savings that you can reach. Talk to a friend, a neighbor, or a lawyer if things feel dangerous. But the deeper lesson is about voice. Learning to use mine after years of softening, it was like learning a new language. The first time I said no with steadiness, I felt guilt like a weight. The 10th time, it felt like a cleared throat. Each firm thing made the next one easier. After Michael moved out, we wrote rules that were not about control but about mutual respect. We wrote them down on a sheet of paper and put it on the fridge. It said things like speak kindly, ask before borrowing, and share bills equally according to income. Simple sentences that read almost like a promise. We all stuck to them better than I expected. He was kinder. He was more thoughtful. We saw each other as grown people who loved each other, not as people who owed each other explanations. At the center of the story is memory. I will not pretend the hurt disappeared overnight. There are evenings I still feel the echo of that shout. It sits in my ribs like an old bell that rings on occasion. But there are also moments when he sits in the living room and tells me about the children's school plays. He forgets his keys on my counter, and I hide them with a smile. We have a new rhythm that is not perfect, but it is honest. It is a rhythm that honors the decades of care that went before and the shared future we still have. If anyone is worried this is a tale of coldness, let me tell you plainly. When a woman my age chooses to protect herself, she is not closing a door for drama. She is opening one to dignity. My answer changed everything because it revealed to my son that his words had consequences and to myself that I had the right to be heard. It was not revenge, it was repair. In the quiet after the storm, I planted new roses. They are smaller than Robert's and a different variety, but they bloom with the same stubborn joy. They remind me that after a long winter, something green will return. I learned that love is not always about endurance. Sometimes it is about knowing when the endurance has to be reshaped into boundaries. For me, the boundary looked like a note and a conversation, a small envelope on a table, and the quiet will to be treated with kindness. The last Christmas we spent under that roof before Michael moved out was quieter than the year he shouted. We ate cranberry sauce and talked about small things. We laughed about an old holiday when the turkey burned, and we all pretended it was crisped just right. I watched my son play with his daughter and saw patience in his hands. I saw him look at me like a man who had finally learned a new way of showing up. It made the hardest night worth it. If you are an older woman listening, hold your ground gently. Teach your children to sit with you at the table and talk instead of shout. Put a limit on what you accept and say it clearly. You do not have to be brittle or unyielding. You can be soft and strong at once. This balance is how we keep ourselves whole. When the story is told, people will ask which line changed everything. They want a single sentence that acted like a magic wand. There was no magic. There was a steady decision made in a kitchen with cinnamon tea cooling in a tin. There was a choice to turn from being treated like a convenience to being a person whose voice mattered. That is not a small thing to claim at 68. It felt like reclaiming a room that had blurred at the edges for too long. Years later, when the grandchildren are grown and maybe friends ask me which story I tell most, I will tell them about the Christmas where my son shouted about rent and I answered by standing up for myself. I will tell them that the lines we draw do not have to be hard. They can be the soft borders of a garden. I will tell them that it took me time to learn this, and that is all right. We learn like the seasons. We learn as long as we breathe. There is a comfort in knowing I did not lose my son. He lost some of his arrogance, and we both found a new kind of respect. We make mistakes, we fix them as best we can. I learned to ask for what I needed. He learned to listen. That is a better gift than anything wrapped in shiny paper. If this story speaks to you, remember to be brave in the small ways that matter. Patience is a virtue, but it isn't a command to be used against you. Keep your papers in order, keep your savings in reach, and keep the people who love you close enough to be witness to your life. Speak your truth softly when you must and firmly when you must. In the end, the house remained a home. The tree still lit up the corner of the living room each December. The roses kept blooming in May. We kept the photograph of Robert on the mantel, and every so often we tell stories about how he would have rolled his eyes at our modern arguments and then winked. Life went on. It always does. But that Christmas taught me the most useful thing I know now. Standing still for your dignity is how you teach others to stand a little straighter, too. And if you remember one last thing from this long story, let it be this. You have a voice and you may use it. You are not asking too much when you ask to be treated with decency. That sentence, simple and honest, was the one I finally said out loud. It changed everything.